Hello and welcome back to Pandemic Playground with Dave. Today we have another experiment for you guys, and that is what can we make with the respawn pod. Experiments. Alright, so let's find out today what can we make with the respawn pod, and that means without digging for stone or any resources, put it into our survival kit, refine it, and assemble any materials right over here. So of course there's some limitations to this because we only got limited amounts of items. So if we were to grind down the entire respawn pod, we end up with this amount of materials. And as you can see, it's not too much. But of course, if we deconstruct the respawn pod and make it as naked as this, meaning one battery, one survival kit, and the rest of the steel plates here, let's see what we can build off of this. And based on seeing the respawn pod itself, obviously you can make a fairly functional ship because it has four atmospheric thrusters at least, and there is a bit of a hydrogen thruster right underneath between the landing gears. So a ship, definitely possible. So let's see what our options are going to be. Alright, let's get started with building and see what we can make with what we have. Alright, so the first iteration is going to be a ship. Because it was a ship already, just going to make it more flyable. So first things first, we're going to need a gyroscope. So gyroscope is going to cost us 10 steel plates, 3 computers, 2 motors, 1 large steel tube, 5 construction components, and 15 steel plates. Which, for the most part, we have all that, so that should not be a huge problem. So we're going to grab that for a ship. We're definitely going to need a gyroscope, and we can hide this anywhere. In most cases, probably ideal right here on top for now. So we'll put that there. Let's just say we don't need an oxygen tank, then we can get away with being as cheap as possible, and that is with a passenger seat, which is 10 interior plates, 20 construction components, and 10 more interior plates, and a remote control. So that's going to be 5 interior plates, 15 computers, 1 motor, 10 construction components, and another 5 interior plates. And of course, we already have the components for it. It is going to be an antenna, at least a small one, which doesn't cost too much except for the radio components. But the fear is we're going to run out of computers actually. So let's just see what this looks like. Antenna here. Passenger seat here. And the last thing is the remote control. Do we have enough materials to make all this? We do. Perfect. And we still got 4 more to go in terms of computers. So here's your simple setup for the start of it. So basically get into your seat. You can hit Shift K or K and go to remote access, or control panel remote access, and here's your small grid. So we can take control of it and we can fly in that sense. So that's the start of it. Of course, we have enough materials for atmospheric thrusters and such. But my question is, do we have enough for an O2H2? And that's going to be looking like 6 steel plates, 8 construction components, 2 large steel tubes, motor, and computers. Let's see, do we have enough for a small grid version? We do. That's looking good. So instead, if we really care to have an O2H2 system here for ice, just to fill up your bottles and such, your right here, oxygen tank and hydrogen tanks here, we can add the O2H2 generator. I normally do this for the most part. Flip this thing around, place it right there, and that is basically where we're going to gather that hydrogen and oxygen. Now, in terms of placement of a seat, now it does get kind of awkward, so it's going to be right there. And put a remote control up here. So now we have full access to everything. So of course, sitting here ain't going to do anything for you in terms of oxygen, if you need the oxygen or the hydrogen in that sense. But we'll put this whole thing in here. So we put the ice in here so we can fill up our hydrogen bottles and oxygen bottles. So by default, you get 300 ice. I did use that up a little bit, so that's what it's 250 from the start. But here we can add our atmospheric thrusters, and that's going to be small ones, of course. We should be able to make 4 total. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Insufficient room, so I think we're good to go. And of course, we can make it in different directions, right? So if we make this light enough, we should be able to get away with 1 on each side, hopefully, and then we should be able to fly it from there. So generally, we would hope to do 1 backwards, 1 forward, and I kind of want to move the gyroscope. Oop. Okay, so we're gonna move the gyroscope a little bit closer, just for now. Looks like I can't place it there. We'll place it here. And nothing's going to be symmetrical because the weight of it is going to be a little off. Obviously, because if you take the battery out, you're not going to get the power cells, the 20 power cells. You can get 20 scrap instead. So what we're going to do is just keep that there, leave it looking unbalanced. But once you get settled in for like with a refinery and assembler, that's when you can build another battery if you need to for a power cell. But right now, we're just using what we have in terms of not refining and not assembling any production or materials. So we're going to just go with what we got. Next step is a left and a right. So that's left, and then this is a right. In that way. But can we make 1 more, which is going to be your up? Oop, it looks like we ran out of motors, right? Nope, not yet. I don't think we have enough for 5th one for upward thrust, do we? I don't think so, but if it does, if we do have, then even better. Yeah, we're missing 12 motors, so we're gonna have to sacrifice something if we were to make something like this. Alright, so this specific build is gonna be missing motors because hydrogen thruster, the small one, doesn't use motors, so that's why we're missing motors. So we gotta find something that gives us motors. If the O2 H2 generator takes motors, that's something we could take from, but it only takes 1, so that's useless to us because we're missing 10. So we likely can't make it, but what we can do is you kind of use the hydrogen thrust as temporary thrusting power going upwards, or we sacrifice not going sideways or something like that, because we need 5 at least for these things, unless we want to start helicopter flying it or something like that. Alright, so it looks like you can't really make a ship with the 5 directional necessary thrusters because you're missing 1 large steel tube. So even if you had a hydrogen thruster, which you probably want it on left or right because that's going to use a little less hydrogen instead of your forward and backwards and up and downs, but you're still missing that 1 large steel tube. And you can't get rid of certain things. I mean, you could potentially get rid of the gyroscope, but you're not going to be able to fly this thing quite right. So for an example, let's just get rid of the gyroscope and put it onto the thruster. Let's just turn this one into a left flying thruster. Get rid of this one. And make this our up and down thrust. There we go. So that you could kind of get away with. You won't have a lot of hydrogen for this thruster here. And we should be able to lift off because it should be light enough. Let's just see if this thing flies. Alright, so it's actually holding weight, so that's not too bad. But keep in mind, there's no gyroscope here, so it's going to be rather awkward to fly. We hopped in here, remote into our ship here, so we connect. We are able to fly left, right, up, and down. And it's relatively easy. It's nothing too crazy. But we have no like pitch left or right because we don't have a gyroscope, and we don't have the means of getting a gyroscope without using the assembler or refining some stone in the very beginning. Plus the hydrogen will run out fairly quickly once we don't have any more ice. So this is a possibility. Is it the best idea in the world? Probably not, but you can get somewhere where you need to get closer to ice or maybe a better spot before you begin. So this thing, again, you can fly it fairly well, but it's very awkward in some ways. So now the kind of debate is it quicker or better, more cost efficient, I should say, to have a regular cockpit such as this, or have a remote with antenna? So if we got rid of the seat, got rid of the remote and the antenna, would we be able to make a regular cockpit here? I think so, right? Let's see. Let's just stick it on here for an example. And nope, you can't make the cockpit because we run out computers and we run out displays. So your best bet is to make a remote control with an antenna, which you should have an antenna by default, which is great, and a passenger seat by default as well. So this is your most efficient way to make a quick little beginner ship, but without a gyroscope. Right, so the only way to really get the gyroscope is if you got rid of the O2H2, which is not something you can do because you need that hydrogen thrust. But if you did get rid of it, for an example, then you don't have the hydrogen thrust here, but you can still fly this thing pretty good with the gyroscope anyways. However, if you did start moving a little to the left, it's going to be a little bit harder to stop. So what you need to do is kind of tilt it around, spin it around a little bit until it stops, or just cut the engines so you just fall down. So that's kind of one way to fly it if you're missing one specific thrusting potential. So ideally, maybe knock out the front one, to be honest, and keep the left and right, because that would make it a lot easier to control, in my opinion. You can fly up, left, right easily, and forward. We can't go backwards, but we can go forward. So we get a little bit of a gliding action here, which is not too bad. So we can slow it down by one of two ways, and that's quickly turning around this way or just dropping to the ground. So it grips on to the ground itself and it's more flyable. So that's the ideal kind of flight you want, instead of being able to spin around and stop it. So if you had to do it with the minimal specs and you don't want to do any digging, refining, and assembling new items, that is definitely a way to get around. So that's the ship version of it, and that works pretty well. So let's move on to a rover version. Alright, so following along the same kind of concept with the remote control, which is a passenger seat, remote control, and antenna, adding the O2H2. This time around I put it in yellow so it's easy to see what I've added from the deconstructed respawn pod. So basically in this build you wouldn't need a gyroscope, but it could be helpful, but I don't even think we can add it to be honest. But we do have to redesign this a little bit to make it more drivable. So I think what I've done in the past is make it kind of like a front one-wheeler, which is a bit odd, but it kind of works too. And in the back we can add a two-wheeler right there. In terms of wheels, you really only have enough to make one wheel because of the small steel tubes. Because one wheel takes two small steel tubes, and I think we get a total of 3. And one of them went to the antenna. So one of them, you definitely want to get the wheel up and running. So for example, we could probably do 3x3 because the 1x1 is the same thing in terms of the suspension itself, but the wheel is a little bit different. It uses more large steel tubes and more construction components, but we would have enough large steel tubes and construction components in that sense. It's the suspension that's the biggest problem. So let's add a 3x3 wheel here. So here we have a front wheel. It's a one-wheeler. And if we really wanted to, we probably could get away with a 5x5 wheel. because it costs 5 large steel tubes. How many large steel tubes do we have left right now? We have 3 minus this 3 here. So we could make it a bigger one if we needed to. However, if once that's done, we could add 2 more back here, but we would not be able to weld it down. That's kind of the trick to it. So if you wanted to weld it down, you could probably weld down 1 wheel, but you won't get the suspension. And right here, at least, once we in it, Shift K to get to the remote access, remote into it. You'll see that we can do left and right for the front one only, which is more than enough to kind of drive it around. I think I made it a little bit too much to the left-hand side, so let's kind of reset that one over. So here we go. Got a little bit of a 3-wheeler, not too bad. And as you can see, if I really wanted to, I can drive this thing perfectly fine. And you see I go left and right here, so I can drive it backwards. You can drive it forward. And we can turn this thing without any problems. So I'm not sure if we can get this off the platform, but we can certainly try. Here we go. So that worked out okay. And you see that it's able to turn, able to drive without too much issues. You can stop it pretty hard and not really flip over. So that's a great thing about this build here. And if you really needed to, I think you can add a gyroscope. Let's give that a shot. I mean, if we can add a gyroscope, we're just going to put one right back here. So we do have enough for a gyroscope, which is great. So that way, if we really have to, we can turn this thing easily with the gyroscope. Well, not easily. Decently with the gyroscope. And one way to really make something, make a vehicle work really well is to really add 2 gyroscopes. One gyroscope that's on and one gyroscope that's going to be on override. So it looks like we can't do it because we're missing 2 computers. So that's not great. But if we want to get rid of the O2 H2 generator, that's the possibility. And then we can have 2 gyroscopes. So one of them is going to have override and one's not going to have override. And that should probably drive a lot better. Right here, yep, I can turn it much better, left and right. As you see here. Here's my right, obviously. And then I can turn it left. And I can go up and down like so. So with ease. And if you don't get enough traction, you can just point it downwards and it drives really well. And if turning wise, it's not as great, but you can turn with the mouse as long as you direct it on the bottom. So that's a possibility. You are going to miss an O2 H2 generator here without the computers, but I think that drives well. But if you're on a planet that needs oxygen, you're going to be SOL until you're ready to dig and assemble a quick computer, which that's easy to do as well, right? Because you can still make a computer. The biggest thing that you can't make, of course, is like large steel tubes, small steel tubes for the wheels and things like that. So, but without even digging or anything like that, this makes a fairly decent vehicle. And you can drive it without 2 gyroscopes, obviously. You don't need it, but it drives better with it. So if you had to, let's just say you're running out of oxygen or hydrogen, destroy one of the gyroscopes for the 3 computers and plug it back into the O2 generator, get what you need, right, in terms of ice, and then dismantle it and put that back. It's a waste of time, but I mean, it's possible. It works. But like I said, you don't need the 2 gyroscope. 2 gyroscope would make it easier to maneuver and turn and everything like that. But even without it, as you see here, works perfectly fine. Now kind of onto the next one. And the next one is going to be something that, you know, I never really thought about. And that's going to be a hovercraft / skimmer. All right, so my last iteration of building without digging a refinery and assembler, we make a skimmer or hovercraft in this sense using suspension wheels, but of course unwelded. So as you see here, it does require the 4 thrusters, so it's forward, backwards, left, and right. A gyroscope right there behind the antenna. And of course, the antenna itself, the remote control, and the passenger seat. And all that's in yellow is what I added into the deconstructed piece that I started with. And then I plopped on some 5x5 wheels for fun with some 3x3 wheels in the front. Honestly, thought it would work out, but nope. It's a little bit tippy because it's not slightly even based on what we have. So you're probably better off doing all 5x5 and all 3x3s in that sense. But it was just playing around with the concept, and it's okay. It's not the best thing in the world. So you see here, we got to go into the wheels. They're all not welded up to be functional, but we can still play around with everything here. So the reason why I have it as 100% friction right now is to stop it from gliding around. So we want to get rid of the friction. The height offset doesn't matter where it is really, but I leave it at 0. I just turn off steering. No real reason to do that. And you, of course, can turn off air shock. I mean, it's not going to do anything right this moment anyways. No strength. Everything doesn't matter, to be honest. It's more about the friction. So here, since we have a gyroscope, we can make this thing tilt left and right easily. And then we can go forward and backwards without any issues. Right here. So once friction gets off, it makes it easier so that you can glide around and everything like that. So a 3x3 wheel in the front and then the 5x5s in the back. It's not terrible. It still works and glides really, really well, as you see here. And it stops okay, and sorry it's gonna make you dizzy, but it's pretty fun to be left and right like this. So you kind of have like a, what they're called, pontoons on the side, something like that. And it kind of works out okay, and you could ramp this thing without any problems. Go jump off a mountain and land and everything like that, and it's okay. The only problem I kind of seem to have here, when we have this bit of a tilt, because we don't have an up and down thruster, it doesn't necessarily stop fully, as you see here. So if you had to do something about it, I think maybe we can turn off the thrusters. Nope. That doesn't seem to work. So of course, if you really need to do it, shut down the power or turn on the friction. The friction will grip on and it'll stop fully. But if turning off the power, I'm not even sure if that's gonna work. So let's see. Let's get off the friction. Okay, we're off the friction and we're slightly gliding left and right a bit, as you see there. But if we turn off the power, which is really gonna turn off just the batteries right there, I don't think it's gonna stop. No, it don't think it is gonna stop. So you have to turn on the friction in order to fully get it stopped. But the problem with this is the only way to add friction is by going to control panels like this, select your block group or all 4 wheels just to stop it. But who wants to do that? You can't add it into your grouping because they're unwelded. So you can't add it as part of a grouping. So here's all the wheels right here. You can't add unwelded stuff into your groupings. So of course, making it with 3x3s and 5x5 is not something you really want to do. I mean, I think you could get away with making 1x1s instead in the front, but you could do that. You could do it all in different ways, if anything. I think. All right, so it looks like I can't win here with the 1x1s with a 5x5. It looks like now the 1x1's too small if we make it up there. But what if we drop it down by 1? Alright, so there's no winning whether you use different types of wheels. As you see here, it's still slightly tilted and it glides a little bit still. So that is not ideal, as you see there. I mean, what you can do is level it out and build more on the left and right side with the same wheels, whether it's 3x3 or 1x1s, and continue to use the pontoons. 100% not necessary, so that it's just a concept to see if it worked. Obviously, you can just build it like so. You do 1 in the front, 1 in the back, and 1 in the left and right, or you build 2 up front here, left and right, and 2 back here, left and right. So that's the easiest way to do that, and you get a pretty nifty looking skimmer like that. But this one works out really nicely because it doesn't have a variance into wheels, and we can go left, right, forward, backwards really easily. We hit these ramps here, right there. We have no issues, and we're gonna fall down. And with some controls, you should be okay. And this thing drives like a dream. Look, I can just speed up to 100 meters per second right here, and then maybe not crash, but we can speed up to that point, as you see right there. And it drives really nicely. And of course, we can still spin it and turn it if we need to and drive back. So the ideal skimmer is going to be the same wheels. You could make it a little bit wider for better balance. Not like this is a little bit too narrow for my liking. But of course, if you see my new time-lapse series, the rover that I built, or the skimmer that I built, is so much better because it looks nice, and it's a little bit wider in terms of the wheel suspension, so we don't really flip over or have the chance to really flip over too much. So yeah, these are the type of builds that you can make without digging, refining, and assembling using the initial respawn pod. Alright, so if you were hoping to make your first vehicle, whether it's a ship, rover, or skimmer, these are some examples of possibilities that you can make with the materials that you have without digging, without refining, and assembling materials. I hope that's all helpful to make your first vehicles in Space Engineers, and hope you guys enjoyed. As always, if you did enjoy this video, hit that thumbs up, like the video. If you haven't done so yet, subscribe to the channel right over here. Don't forget to drop a comment down below to help with the analytics. And of course, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.